5 days trapped, every hostage walked out alive, and the men who saved them were erased from history. A spring morning, a European capital, an embassy under siege. No one dies in a 5-day standoff. That almost never happens. Snipers on the roofs, frightened people counting hours by heartbeat. One officer, days from retirement, would later say he never fired a single shot and never slept the same again. Everyone lived, so why did the medals never come? One decision in the final hour should have ended in blood. It didn't, and we'll show you why. And that retiring officer? His last act on duty would haunt him for 40 years. This is against all odds, and this is the silent siege. It began the way nothing memorable ever announces itself, with paperwork. The embassy sat on a quiet boulevard in a European capital, its brass plaque polished, its front steps swept. Inside, the morning ran on routine. A clerk sorted visa applications. A young diplomat poured coffee that would go cold on his desk. A telephone operator adjusted her headset and settled in for another unremarkable shift. There were roughly 24 people in the building. Most of them were not soldiers, not spies, not anyone who imagined their name would ever appear in a report. They were ordinary. A translator with a toothache, an office manager counting the days to a holiday, a visitor who had come only to sort out a document and leave. That visitor is worth pausing on. He had nearly canceled the trip. The line was always long, the process always slow, and he'd told his wife that morning he might just do it another week. She'd talked him into going. Renew it now, she said, before the deadline. So he went. He took a number, sat on a wooden bench, and waited beneath a slow-turning ceiling fan for his name to be called. It never was. Outside, the street carried on. Trams rattled past. A cafe 2 doors down set out its chairs. A policeman on the corner checked his watch and thought about lunch. There was no cordon, no warning, no reason for anyone to look twice at the men walking calmly toward the embassy entrance with bags slung over their shoulders. Inside, the fan kept turning. The clerk stamped another form. The coffee cooled. And for a few more seconds, the building held on to its ordinary morning like a breath no one knew they were holding. Then the men reached the door. What happened next took less than a minute, the kind of minute that divides a life into before and after. Voices rose. Something metal clattered against the marble floor. The visitor with the document half stood from his bench and never finished the motion. The front doors swung shut, heavy, final. A bolt slid home. Someone drew the blinds, and the daylight that had filled the lobby narrowed to thin gold bars, then to nothing at all. The building went dark. And on the boulevard outside, the tram still rattled, the cafe still served, and the policeman on the corner still thought about lunch, because no one out there, not one single soul, yet knew that inside those walls the ordinary morning was already over. Room by room, the building changed hands. The captors moved with a purpose that suggested rehearsal. They separated the staff from the visitors, herded them into a single upper room, and posted a man at the window. They were not many, a handful, no more. But a handful with weapons inside a sealed building is enough to bend 24 lives around them. Their demands came in fragments at first, shouted, then written, then relayed. They wanted attention. They wanted a cause heard in a country that had stopped listening. What they did not seem to want, strangely, was anyone dead, and that small mercy would matter more than anyone yet understood. Outside, the world caught up all at once. The policeman on the corner made a call. Within an hour, the boulevard was unrecognizable. Barricades, flashing lights, marksmen threading onto neighboring rooftops, and a growing crowd held back behind tape. The cafe pulled its chairs inside. Into this arrived the officer. He was older than the men around him, gray at the temples. Weeks from a retirement he had already half imagined. A garden, a quiet house, no more nights like this one. He had spent a career learning that the loudest option is rarely the right one. He listened to the situation report, studied the building's floor plan taped to the hood of a car, and asked a single question. How many ways can this end without a funeral? First contact came through a single telephone line, one fragile thread connecting the sealed building to the world. A negotiator picked it up and began the slow work of turning enemies into people who talk. Here's the strange part. To stretch the clock, the negotiators started ordering food, pizza of all things, timing each delivery to the second, using the handovers to glimpse inside, to read faces, to steal minutes. Every warm box that crossed the threshold bought a little more life. But minutes were not a plan. By nightfall, command faced a decision that had narrowed to 2 doors, and both looked black. Storm the building, fast, violent, and pray the hostages survive the crossfire. Or wait and gamble that patience wouldn't run out before the captors did. One option risked bodies now, the other risked bodies later. Both looked like they ended the same way. Which one would you choose? They chose to wait. And waiting, it turned out, was the hardest weapon to hold. Hours folded into a day, then a second. Inside, the air grew stale and the fear grew quiet. Not gone, just worn smooth by exhaustion. People learned the rhythm of their captors, when they paced, when they slept, when a raised voice meant nothing and when it meant everything. The officer worked the outside like a man diffusing something. He kept the marksmen still. He kept the politicians calm. Every few hours he took the phone himself, not to threaten, but to ask small human questions. Is anyone hurt? Does anyone need medicine? Have you eaten? He understood something the crowd behind the tape did not, that a siege is not won by force. It is won by making the other side want to walk out. And here we have to correct the record. For decades, the popular version of this story, the one repeated in dramatizations and half-remembered headlines, insisted the siege ended in a heroic assault. Doors kicked in, smoke, glory. That is the myth. The fact is almost the opposite. The turning point was not an attack. It was the deliberate, disciplined refusal to attack. The decision to let time do the work that bullets couldn't. The action movie ending never happened. The real ending was slower, quieter, and far braver. Because inside those walls, something no strategist could have planned was taking shape. A hostage and one of the captors fell into conversation and discovered, impossibly, that they had grown up on the same street, knew the same corner shop, the same church bell, the same crooked lamppost. They talked through an entire night about a neighborhood neither had seen in years. By morning, it was very hard for one of them to point a weapon at the other. That is what patience buys. Not surrender, recognition. But patience has an enemy, and its name is the clock. On the final day, a new voice came down the phone line, harder than before. The waiting had frayed the captors too. An ultimatum landed like a dropped stone. 90 minutes. After that, they said, it ends, one way or another. 90 minutes, and the longest wait of these men's lives was about to become the shortest. The officer set down the phone and did not blink. 90 minutes is not time to plan. It is time to trust the plan you already made. He gave no order to storm. Instead, he sent the negotiator back on the line with the one thing patience had earned him, a relationship. You don't want this, the negotiator said. No one in there wants this. Walk out and everyone lives, including you. And then something extraordinary happened. The deadline arrived and passed. The captors let it slide. The night before had done its quiet work. The street, the lamppost, the shared church bell had reached further than any threat. One by one, arrangements were made, guarantees given. The tension didn't explode, it deflated. The doors opened. Hostages came out into the floodlights, blinking, unsteady, alive. The visitor who had come only for a document walked out on his own 2 feet, the unfinished paperwork still somewhere on that wooden bench. The translator with the toothache, the office manager, the young diplomat. Every single one. 5 days, 0 dead. Everyone got out alive. And that closes the first question we opened. Everyone lived. So the medals came, the parade filled the boulevard, the names went into the history books. Except, no, none of that happened. Instead, the silence began almost immediately. There was no parade, no proclamation. The officer who had held the line for 5 sleepless days went home, and no one came to shake his hand. The men who had bought lives with pizza and patience and refusal filed their report and waited for a thank you that never arrived. And here's a detail that still stops me cold. The official record of the entire operation, 5 days, dozens of lives, an outcome that intelligence services would study for a generation, ran to a single page. 1 page, for the greatest thing these men would ever do. At first they told themselves it was modesty, bureaucracy. That recognition moved slowly. They saved everyone. That much was undeniable, paid in full. So why, just a few weeks later, were the very same officers being called back in, one by one, seated across a table, and questioned not like heroes, but like suspects? The questions were polite at first, then they weren't. Why didn't you assault sooner? Why did you let the deadline pass? Whose decision was the delay? Are you certain? Absolutely certain? Nothing was mishandled. The men who had refused to spill blood now found themselves defending that refusal as if it were a crime. Something had shifted in the corridors above them. A bloodless victory, it turned out, was politically useless. There was no dramatic rescue to televise, no enemy dramatically defeated, no clean story of good men triumphing over bad. Worse, the whole affair raised questions certain officials would rather not answer about the cause the captors named, about why they'd been listened to at all, about what had been promised behind closed doors to make them walk out. The simplest solution was to make it disappear. So the machinery of forgetting began, not with a bang, with erasure. The one-page report was quietly reclassified. Names were softened into initials, then into personnel present. The officer who had led the response found his role shrinking with every retelling until, in the official version, there was almost no one there at all, just a situation that had somehow resolved itself. And this is the part that still makes me angry. A commendation was drafted. Someone, somewhere, understood what these men had done and put it on paper. The officer's name, the citation, the signature at the bottom. It existed, it was real, and then it was pulled from the file before it could ever be awarded, removed, as if the ink itself was inconvenient. The men noticed the change in how people looked at them. The invitation stopped. The promotions went elsewhere. Colleagues who had cheered them in the first heady hours now found reasons to be elsewhere in the hallway. The officer, weeks from retirement, watched his final chapter rewrite itself into an embarrassment he could not explain to his own wife. Then came the last act. The case file, every statement, every log, the drafted commendation, the truth of what had really happened in that final 90 minutes was gathered together, stamped, sealed, and shelved. As far as the record was concerned, none of these men were ever there. The 5 days had happened to no one. The file went dark, and what was sealed inside it would take 40 years to see daylight again. Rewind, because to understand what they buried, you have to stand inside that final hour. 90 minutes on the clock. Inside the building, the captors were exhausted, cornered, and armed. The most dangerous combination there is. On the rooftops opposite, marksmen lay motionless behind their scopes, crosshairs resting on windows, waiting for a word. That word would have come from one man, the officer. Every instinct in the system around him screamed, "Go! End it! Take the shot!" A violent resolution would have been understood, even praised. The assault, the smoke, the glory. It was the expected ending. It was the safe career move. He said no. Here is the decision that kept the body count at 0, and it wasn't luck. Though history would later file it under exactly that word. It was a read. The officer understood from 5 days of small human questions that the captor's resolve was collapsing faster than their deadline. He gambled that talk would outrun the trigger, so he held the marksman still and sent words through the door instead of men. He was right. The doors opened. Everyone lived. And this is the moment that haunts the reconstruction. In that final minute, one of the marksmen on the rooftop had a clear line on a figure at the window. Years later, he admitted the truth. His finger was already on the trigger, the pressure already building. One reflex, one twitch of adrenaline, and the shot fires. The captors panic. The room erupts, and 5 days of restraint end in seconds of slaughter. He didn't fire, because the officer never gave the word. That is what the sealed file contained. Not a mistake, a masterclass. The clearest evidence that discipline, not force, had saved every life in that building, and that the men who chose restraint had chosen correctly, at enormous personal risk, against every pressure bearing down on them. They had done everything right. So here's the question that hangs over all of it, the one the record refused to answer for 4 decades. If the decision was that right, if restraint saved every hostage, every captor, everyone, then why did the men who made it spend the next 40 years being treated as if they'd done something wrong? The officer retired that season, as planned. The garden, the quiet house, the mornings with nowhere to be. But the peace never came. Because here is the last thread we left open. His final act on duty, that single word he refused to give, that order to hold, to wait, to trust a human voice over a rifle. It was the finest decision of his career, and it followed him home like a shadow. He replayed it in the dark for 40 years, not because he doubted it, but because the world had told him, in 1,000 small silences, that it had been wrong. Imagine being certain you saved every life in a room, and spending 4 decades being treated as though you should apologize for it. Recognition, when it finally came late, decades late, when a new generation reopened the sealed file and found the truth stamped and shelved inside. By then, some of the men were gone. The commendation that had been pulled from the record was, at last, acknowledged. For the officer, it arrived near the end of a long life, a piece of paper answering a question he'd carried since a spring morning that never left him. Some victories are punished precisely because they were bloodless, because a quiet success gives no one a hero to celebrate and no villain to blame. History remembers the men who fired. It forgets the ones who chose not to. These men beat the impossible. 5 days, 0 dead. Their reward was silence, and silence, it turns out, can last 40 years. So here is our question of the day. 2 ways of seeing it, and I want your sharpest thinking. Best analysis gets pinned. First, if saving everyone earned them nothing, was their restraint courage, or just a decision the world was never ready to reward? And second, if you were that officer, would you make the exact same call again, knowing the price wasn't blood but 40 years of being erased? Tell us in the comments, and if this story of quiet, unrewarded courage stayed with you, subscribe to Against All Odds. We find the people history tried to forget, and we put their names back. Because sometimes the greatest victories leave no scars to show for them, only the ones you can't see. See you in the next one. Stay curious, stay analytical. History is never as settled as it seems.